loved it because they said it got that initial bit of they got that a bit of experience on their CV. They could get recommendations from there, and nearly everyone I know who's been on the scheme have gone on to find an actual job. If I had to be critical about Kickstart, which I don't want to be because I think it's the best thing in the world, but what I would change is maybe sort of opening it up to a lot more different people. Because I think when I did it, I was at the top of the age range. I think I was 24, and I had people who were 27, who were 25, who couldn't find work, who'd been affected by the pandemic. They couldn't find jobs either. So if I'm being really critical, I would open it up to more people. But yeah, I can't say enough good things about Kickstart. I think it gave me the employability skills that I desperately needed. It gave me that foot in the door, which I really needed, and it helped me sort of train. It helped me with my soft skills, my hard skills, and I don't think I'd be here in Clarion as a digital marketing executive if it wasn't for it. So yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Emraj. And yeah, thanks, Jack. That's it from us. I'll put my email in the chat as well after this if anybody has follow-up. But yeah, happy to take any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you both. Just a quick note, I've started recording just about halfway through that. Normally I have my lovely assistant Henry on the call with me who does that for me, but he's not here today. So we'll miss the beginning, but the discussion should be recorded. So I know there's been a few questions going on in the chat, but if anyone wants to put their hand up and come in, that's probably the best way to do it. Yeah, sorry, I can't actually see your name, but the person with your hand up.
Hi, yeah, it's Happy. My name's Happy. I'm a social prescriber. Apologies, my camera's not working this morning. Monday malfunction. I'm a social prescriber, so I work in Northwest London with 10 GP practices, and I'm coming across a lot of young people, and this is some of the things that are key that Hemraj has just spoken about, and so has Hannah. That has been really interesting. What I wanted to know is the Kickstart program at the moment, I'm aware, is not available via the job centre. Is this a project that you're actually offering still?
No, we're not. So the Kickstart program was a limited pot of funding that ended towards the end of the pandemic. One of the not downsides, but one of the real challenges for continuing the Kickstart program is that it is expensive for a company to run because it's 6 months salary for a young person. So lots of employers did it when the DWP was paying for it. I don't know of anyone who's really replicated Kickstart exactly as it was once that funding had ended. I'm sure, like many other organizations who had a positive experience with it, we're trying to do similar things. But one of the big challenges is how affordable it is to run for an organization without external support.
Sure. Right. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think that was probably one of the big strengths of the Kickstart scheme is employers, because they had the government funded wages, were able to take more risks on young people and give people opportunities they wouldn't normally have. Laura's asked if anyone's heard anything from DWP about new programs. I haven't heard anything, but I'm going to sort of touch on in our presentation a little bit about this, so there'll be an opportunity to discuss that at the end. But if anyone has heard anything, please feel free to jump in. Gillian, do you want to come in, please?
Yeah, hi. Thank you. Really useful presentations, and certainly echo all the positives that we saw of Kickstart in the Kirklees district, which is in West Yorkshire. I was just interested in everyone's opinion on the length of a Kickstart placement, with it being 6 months, and whether you felt that was the right time. Was it too short? Was it too long? Was 6 months kind of key in the success of the programme?
So we covered, we touched on that in the evaluation. Again, you'll see it, we'll share around the full report. We asked that as part of the survey for feedback when we went out to all of our Kickstarters. They overwhelmingly wanted it to be longer. The Kickstarters in the survey said that they felt like 6 months is just not very long. By the time you get to really, because you spend a month figuring out where on earth you are, you spend maybe a month getting settled in the role, and then you have to think about leaving. So a lot of the Kickstarters said that 6 months didn't feel long enough for them as part of the survey, which I thought was quite interesting, but people may disagree.
Thank you. And I was just wondering from an employer perspective, if I just kind of share some of the feedback that we had, that employers probably felt similar to what you found from young people, that people were just starting to get kind of settled in, and they were starting to see the productivity gains when they had to make a decision about the progression element.
Yeah, we had a couple of employers within our partnership who had the funding in the infrastructure, who kind of independently took the decision to extend their places for a year. You know, they did it off their own back, and they continued the model, but they continued it for a year, which was interesting. I don't think we actually have any data about whether their Kickstarters did any better or any worse out of that, but that could be an interesting one for us to look at.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to bring Sophie in, but just quickly, what Vanda said in the chat, if you haven't read it, is very useful. I think you have to look at this in the context of the government did it in quite unprecedented circumstances, and even if it does work, they're unlikely to spend the kind of money on this kind of scheme again for political reasons. But yeah, it's a very good point. Sophie, do you want to come in?
Hi, yeah, I'm not sure if this is the same for everybody. We're in a small area in Wales, Pembrokeshire. We have what's called now Skills Future, which is a shared prosperity funding. And we have it's called a wage, it's WSTS. It's like a wage incentive, which is kind of a carry on from Kickstart, but it's for a lot shorter period. I don't know whether that is specifically for Wales or whether it's something that has been rolled out across the country, but that was kind of like on the back of the success of Kickstart.
Yeah, it's not something that I've heard of in England, so I'm not sure it's happening here, but it sounds like a good program that I'll definitely read more into. Has anyone got any more questions for Hannah about the report, or for Hemraj about his experience as Kickstarter? Just thinking before we move on, we're going to have the opportunity to have quite a wide-ranging discussion on Kickstart at the end of the forum. Okay, well, on that note, I might move on to ERSA's presentation. Our report's obviously not finished yet, but I'm just going to pull up some slides now. Sorry, 1 second.
While you're doing that, Jack, would it be useful if I put our report in the chat so people can have a look at it?
Yeah, and then I was also going to, because there's quite a lot of people who registered who aren't actually in the room today. So when I send the recording out, I'll send a link to your report as well. But yeah, if you want to stick it in the chat, and I know you've already put your email address.
Great.
Can you see those slides, Hannah, that I've just pulled up?
Yes, yeah.
Brilliant, great. Okay, so get my notes up. This report that we're sort of working on, it's going to come out sometime after the conference, is called the Kickstart Stories Report. The work for it started long before I started at ERSA in the spring of 2022, and was conducted by Henry, who's now our head of policy and public affairs. So the idea behind this report, as some of you will know, and I'll speak about in a few slides, we ran a network to do with the Kickstart scheme as it was happening, and we did a series of interviews to try and get some of the knowledge that was knocking about in that community out there, and look at the kind of more qualitative rather than quantitative evidence behind the scheme, and try and sort of humanize scheme and look at examples of good practice and things like that. So a brief little introduction, some of which has already been covered by Hannah. This was a £2 billion funded government scheme which created 6-month paid work placements for 16 to 24-year-olds. As I sort of mentioned before in the discussion, that's quite unprecedented, and I don't think that there's any chance it would have happened if it wasn't for the COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, it came about in September 2020, and in September 2020, we were kind of facing down the barrel of a youth unemployment crisis. Obviously, generally in times of economic crisis, young people are often the first out of the door. In terms of employers, you know, it's sort of last in, first out kind of thing. So youth employment can really spike quite quickly. And this scheme was designed to offset that. In terms of the employment support sector and their involvement in the scheme, sort of widely involved, both as gateways like Clarion Futures and obviously as employers taking on their own Kickstarters. So employment support sector organisations were really well placed to act as a gateway for the DWP. So the original idea on the Kickstart scheme was that if you were taking on more than 30 Kickstarters as an employer, you had to apply through a gateway. That was the original idea when the policy first came out, and that sort of later changed and caused some confusion, which I'll come to in a second. Pardon me. And yeah, so employment support organisations are really well placed to do that because they're used to delivering employment support in terms of CV writing, help with applications, and then also the kind of wraparound support that the scheme was designed to have running alongside the 6-month placement. So ERSA's role in this, from the beginning of the scheme, we ran the ERSA Kickstart Community Forum, and this was intended to support our members that were acting as gateways and also our members who are acting as employers on the scheme. And then, as I just touched on, as the scheme developed, there were what we'll call some teething issues, which basically the gateway thing was a problem with that because the DWP changed the rules so that the original idea of what a gateway was became kind of not that at all, because employers were allowed to take direct applications through DWP for 30 and more employers. So that led to some confusion, and in response, in 2021, we published a report entitled Extend, Expand and Empower, which kind of elucidated some of these problems that were existing or teething issues, which I mean is to be expected in a sort of big national scheme that was commissioned quite quickly to respond to a crisis. So that's a bit of background on what work ERSA has already done on the Kickstart scheme. So this report is going to be published in full following the ERSA conference. Obviously, we're a small team and we're just working on getting that out of the way first. And it's based on a series of semi-structured interviews with gateways, employers and young people. And these were conducted in the spring of 2022. So for the purpose of this presentation, I've just pulled out 3 examples, one for a gateway, one for a young person and one for an employer from the report. And I'm going to sort of speak a little bit about them. And I just thought as we were covering this today, I'd give a little bit of a sneak preview of what we're working on. So Newground, they were a gateway. And I think the key thing that you can get from this is the wraparound support that employment support sector organisations were able to provide. You can see in this example, sorry for the big lump of text, I will send the slides out afterwards and you can read it in full. Getting a young person into sustainable employment also benefits other aspects of wellbeing in their life. And also in this example, Newground were able to help this young person attain a flat and deal with relationship problems and generally improve their life in a way that they wouldn't have been able to do if they were in a global pandemic on universal credit with no real option in the labour market because there wasn't this government funding there. So I think that's a really good example. And then this employer case study I thought was interesting because it stresses the extent to which it wasn't just young people being helped by this scheme. And we kind of touched on this earlier because this funding was available at the level that it was, it also was able to support businesses that otherwise, per the example that you can read on your screen, might have gone out of business during the COVID pandemic. So I think that's a really interesting aspect that people don't speak about so much, is that not only is the money being spent to help young people, it's also helping local economies, helping small businesses, and doing other good things, especially at a time when it was really necessary for that to happen. Sorry, apologies. Oh, and then this last case study of a young person, Nicola. I think what this really makes clear is the extent to which employers were able to take chances on young people who, if they hadn't have had the government funding to do, they might not have taken a chance on. But once they did take that chance, because there was no financial risk to them, that young person then ended up building their confidence and excelling in that workplace and is now maintained without government funding as a full-time member of staff. So I think that just shows that, I think Katie picked this up in the chat, the extent to which this can change recruitment practices of employers and essentially allow them to open their workplace up to people they might not normally let in. But ultimately, those people end up doing a really good job and then staying on. So yeah, I think that's a really good example of A, the benefit it has to a young person, B, the change in recruitment practice, and C, also the benefit it has ultimately to the employer because they've let the young person stay on, so they must be doing a good job. The report, when it comes out, and I'm not going to go over them yet because I thought I better leave something for when we actually publish it, has some reflections on the way the scheme was operated, such as the teething issues I mentioned, and has some recommendations about, say, there was another global pandemic, touch wood there won't be, but if there was, how would we commission this differently? What can we learn from the way we did it? So that's going to be in the final report. But we're going to do some policy sort of recommendations and thinking about what relevance does Kickstart model provision have in a post-COVID United Kingdom where there probably isn't the political context to have the same scheme again. And I've just put a few of these here because I quite like to get colleagues in the room's thoughts on them in the discussion. So yeah, I started thinking about, well, there are areas where you could spend a lot less money doing the same thing but have a bigger impact. So for example, in local areas that are more economically deprived and have higher NEET rates, if you had a localized Kickstart scheme there, not only would it boost the employment prospects of young people, but it would also boost the local economy, like in the employer example in Bradford that I mentioned earlier. I think sector-specific Kickstarts are also a really interesting idea. For example, in health and social care, there's nearly 200,000 vacancies still in the United Kingdom. So perhaps directing some government money to attract young people to that sector through a scheme like this might be a really interesting idea. And I think probably the best idea is group-based Kickstart. So this would be for young people that we know are at more risk of becoming NEET. For example, care leavers, ethnic minorities, sort of other young people like that. And I think care leavers is a really good example. ERSA did a report earlier this year with the Educational Development Trust, and neurodiverse was the other group that I meant to say at the end of that. And in terms of care leavers, they have such higher percentages and such larger complex barriers to entering employment that often traditional employment support can't sort of overcome. Like, I'll give an example from our report earlier this year. There was a care leaver who had an apprenticeship in a local area, but because they turned 18 and their accommodation changed, they then had to move across like 3 towns and couldn't get to their apprenticeship anymore. So I think sometimes the best solution is to just give somebody a job, and that was probably what was so good about the Kickstart scheme, is if you give someone the job, they can get a house or they can rent a flat, and it sort of builds up and leads to better well-being. So yeah, I'm very keen in the discussion to get some reflections from people on these ideas, and if you think they're useful and worth putting in the report. I'm very happy to take any questions. I'm just going to pull my slides down now. Yeah, either in the chat or feel free to put your hand up. I can see India, you've got your hand up, so if you'd like to come in.
Hiya, yeah. So I am with the provider autonomy. I actually previously worked on Kickstart. So I was a Kickstart district account manager and a Kickstart account manager in West London. So I covered Acton, Harlesden, and a few other job centres. But I really thought whilst I was working on it, it was a really good programme. And I think the points you raised are very comforting to know that it did do very well. Definitely think it would benefit, like you said, care leavers, as I did come across many claimants that were care leavers. So yeah, just wanted to confirm kind of your thoughts.
Thanks. Appreciate that a lot. Sorry, I didn't see whose hand was up first. I'm trying to pull up some Menti slides, but Sonia, do you want to come in?
Hi, yes. Can you hear me? Is my mic working?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yes, so Sonia Kilty from Bradford. So that was lovely to see our paragraph and, you know, our mention of the city on there. I can only say I always from the beginning said it was brilliant Kickstart. I know I used to come to a lot of ERSA meetings and there was a lot of gateway issues on that seemed to be a bit of a thing at the time. But luckily we didn't have any of that because I just went through Bradford Council, so we were quite lucky. It was all kind of sorted. I think Bradford Council took on about 500 in the end or something huge. But for the Bradford Museums, we took on 15, which was a big thing for us at the time, over 2 cohorts. But talking about the leaving in care, as soon as it ended, which we were gutted about, the Kickstart scheme, I did move straight to a leaving care enterprise partnership program that we had in the council. So that was, as soon as the Kickstart ended, I was contacted by someone in HR who said, you'd be great to take on a leaving in care young person. And, you know, I had him for 12 months afterwards. So it was a good prep and a good pilot for future apprenticeships going forward. So we've had apprenticeships ever since, really, because of Kickstart. The leaving care was good because, again, it was paid. And I think they very much based it on the Kickstart model within the council. So it was better because it wasn't 6 months, it was 12 months. And it was paid on the 25 hours a week format. So it was a little bit harder, you know, but it was good. And you had a social worker helping out. And it was just a good continuum, I think. So, yeah, definitely need more.
Thanks for that, Sonia. Yeah, I think that's maybe kind of the idea behind this report we're doing at the moment, is to try and get that point of view across, because I think a lot of the kind of discourse on it has maybe been a bit negative and has been focused on the sort of gateway issues, and then also like in the national conversation sort of instances of fraud and things like that. But actually for a lot of people it works really well, and that's why we're trying to sort of make this point. Deborah, would you like to come in?
Hi, just want to make a couple of points. One, I think you're right, the logistics, we all know that there were issues with that, and that's possibly always the way that is with these programs. However, we had some really successful Kickstarts that actually stayed with us, and some, just to say that as a housing association, even though they didn't get the roles, we continued the support after they left us. So even though there was no funding, we didn't just leave them, we actually supported them. And it was really good to know that quite a few of them actually went into other employment in other places, because we were able to do sort of the wraparound support. So no, we weren't funded for it, it finished, but as far as we were concerned, we couldn't leave them to it. So I think that was a really important point, that we didn't just, you know, let them sort of find their own way. The other thing is, I just wanted to say that there were programs in the past where you could offer training wages, very much the same as Kickstart, where employers would take a chance, because the relationship with those that, and I was part of an apprenticeship training provider, they developed a relationship with us. They trusted that we'd worked with the youngsters, the students, and we worked up to 24 before they actually went into a workplace. And I think it's the soft skills, the employability aspects that are missing from school, college, university. And I'm seeing an awful lot of institutions that have got lovely ticks in their Gatsby, and, you know, they look like they do things brilliantly on reports. And I'm actually talking to the youngsters after they've come out of those institutions and found that we're just not preparing any young people as we should. So I think there is a big gap there. And just one other thing, because you mentioned about sector specific, I hear all of that, but if the issues start much earlier, you're asking whoever takes on that youngster to do a huge job to get them up to where they need to be. So we need to look at the geographical issues as well, and whether these schools in these areas are failing the students full stop, because every single sort of knock-on institution and organisation and employer afterwards can't pick up the issues and the failures of the one before. And I think sometimes we fail to say, you know, that it's actually a chain reaction for some of these youngsters, which is woeful given how much money's being thrown at these programs.
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. That's really useful. Right, for some reason, normally when I'm making Menti slides, I can pull them up in Teams, but I'm going to have to share my screen to get them up. So I might not be able to see whose hand is going up. So we might have to do, as I'm the only one from ERSA here today, might have to do a little bit of, you can just jump in if you want to speak. But let me just pull these up. Hopefully people can see this. Yeah, if you would like to join, thanks for that. If you'd like to join using the code there, and I've got a few questions on here that would be great to get some responses to. But I'm also happy for people to jump in and speak about the question that's on your screen as we're doing it. I don't know if people have managed to get on there.
Yeah, I've been able to join. I'm just typing my answer. I can't talk and type at the same time. Sorry, Jack.
Brilliant. I now can only see what's on my screen and not anything in the meeting, so it's a bit disorientating. So if you go to menti.com and then put the code in that's at the top of the screen there, you'll be able to join. The person who just asked that in the chat. I have actually joined on my phone now, so I think if someone puts their hand up, I'll be able to see. I don't know if anyone who's put an answer already wants to come in and tell us a little bit more about what they've said. Okay, I'm just going to move this on to the next slide. Oh, actually, no, we're getting some more. Does anybody want to come in and speak a little bit about what they've said or give a few more reflections?
Is there any sort of advocacy going on in relation to encouraging the government to have another Kickstart or version of it? I know that they've extended the Restart scheme, but is there any
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, we'd definitely be involved in. I think the ERSA opinion is that a lot since basically the last fiscal event or budget or whatever they decide to call it, there's been a lot of focus on economic inactivity in general and for older people, but very little focus on issues that still exist for young people. I mean, we sort of accept neat rates of around 12%. I think they're that now, and they were that about 7 prime ministers ago. Whereas in the EU, they have targets. They have an EU-wide target to get it below 10%, and we don't really have any of that. And I know that's not quite a Kickstart scheme, but I think there is probably a lot of space for advocacy on saying, you know, youth economic inactivity is still a big problem, and it hasn't gone away. And maybe, hopefully, some of the policy recommendations in this report can, when it comes out, can inform that a bit.
Okay.
Okay, I'll move on to the next slide. Really interested to get some reflections on sort of the direct benefit that this gave to young people, because we know that there's a lot, but as as we call it, the Kickstart Stories scheme. It's good to hear individual stories or individual examples.
How are we feeling that the Kickstart in particular compares to apprenticeships at the moment?
I think, well, for a start, the wage for, I believe I'm right in saying the Kickstart wages were slightly higher than they would be for a lot of apprenticeships. And I also think the difference, I suppose, is an apprenticeship is a qualification, whereas a Kickstart is, a first start into the labour market. So they are different in that sense. I think there's a place for both of them in youth employment policy and sort of support, but yeah, I think there's some key differences. I don't know if anyone else wants to come in and reflect on the difference between the two.
I appreciate that they're different programs and obviously the outcomes might be slightly different, but do we think that the government's thinking is that, well, we've got apprenticeships, so we don't need Kickstart?
And that may well be why. I think probably the government, I'd say the government's thinking is probably because this was a fully funded wage for 6 months. If you compare that to like furlough or other COVID era programs, they're not something that you would see a Conservative government doing basically at any other point in British history. They were necessitated or seen as necessary by the circumstances of the pandemic, is certainly how I'd view them. So I think that is probably more why they're thinking no more Kickstarts rather than we already have apprenticeships. William, I think you've got your hand up. Apologies, it's really hard for me to see who's looking to come in today.
It was just on the finance apprenticeship. Okay, so I work at a company in London. One of the problems older maybe are into apprenticeship.
So I'm not sure. I can't quite hear you, William.
Can you
I'm
hear
not
me
sure.
now? Sorry.
Yeah, that's a lot better. Do you want to start again? Because I don't think we got much of that.
That's fine. Yeah, it was just on the finances of apprenticeships. I think it's really difficult for those sort of slightly older people, maybe mid to late 20s, that are interested in them and want to transition into a different sector just due to the finances alone. I mean, obviously the rates are slightly higher for those that are slightly older, but there is such a sort of drop-off point unless you're sort of living at home with your parents. The financial side of it just isn't feasible, particularly in London, I think. I mean, I know a lot of the partnerships we do, we focus on a London living wage, which is a good starting point for the apprenticeships, but in general that is a big barrier that I've seen, particularly things like construction, where we want people going into it, but the time you're going to spend on that lower end of the wage, if you're renting a property privately, you basically are priced out of going on to something like an apprenticeship in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's certainly an issue that I've heard from apprenticeship providers, and I think apprenticeships is something I want to do one of these forums on in the near future. So if you're working in that world or you have something you'd like to present on apprenticeships, please do drop policy@ersa.org.uk an email and we can have a conversation about it. Jump it onto the next slide. Again, everyone just feel free to jump in if you need to. I know a few colleagues have had to jump off. That's absolutely fine. I'll be sending the recording round after this. William, I think that might be your mic that's still on. If you could mute yourself, that would be great. It's causing a bit of interference. Oh. Geez, that should now be sorted. Do you know if anyone would like to put their hand up and come in about any challenges with Kickstart? I feel like we haven't really touched on them today, and there certainly were some in terms of the teething issues. Any other opinions?
I put my hand up, but I'll just start talking, Jack, because I know you can't.
Yeah,
you aren't hearing.
I can't really see. I'm sorry.
One thing that was raised in our report, and I wonder whether other employers here agree, is the way that sick pay and absence was handled. So we had a lot of employers in our gateway feeding back that because the instructions from the DWP was that you had to pay regardless of things like sick pay and absence, they didn't really have a mechanism to get young people thinking about their attendance. We had a lot of employers frustrated to say, well, under our normal policy, this young person has been absent X number of days in a row. We would be docking their pay, or we would be, starting our internal procedures, but they just had to keep paying anyway. And that was a challenge for quite a lot of employers who struggled with those young people who maybe weren't ready or who didn't have a good understanding around attendance and kind of etiquette in the workplace.
That's a really interesting point. I think maybe that comes back to a lot of the time. I think one of our reflections on it is that there can always be more wraparound support as part of these programs, and I think that's why Gateways and the employment support sector in general being really involved in the Kickstart scheme is important, because they understand how to deal with maybe those slightly more complex young people and perhaps explain to them the expectations of them and explain what employers are expecting. But yeah, a really interesting point. If anyone else wants to just jump in, as clearly I can't see who's put their hand up.
Can I just add to that about the sickness?
Yeah, of course you can.
That one of the things and this is again working with youngsters before they ever got to go out on apprenticeships, we made it very clear right from the get-go that actually it was part of the package, that you've got to show that to the employer that you're reliable, and it's no good doing the job well if you're never there and if you never get there on time. And it was one of the things we established with all of our Kickstarts right from day one, that actually there's an expectation, and if you want to impress, there are certain things you need to do as an employee. Forget the role, forget the training, forget the job. These are the fundamentals, and if you're not there, no matter how brilliant you are when you are, they're not going to want to employ you. So we did have those conversations. We did have, let's be honest, we had a Kickstart was running his own business while he was actually using our own PCs. That's another story for another day. But that was something we did establish early on, and it did seem to help with the ongoing conversations about I wasn't in, and I've had a back to work interview, and again we treated them exactly the same as you would any other member of staff, which was all of our staff have a back to work, so they did too. So I think even if they didn't benefit maybe from that experience, they might have thought twice about when they went somewhere else.
Yeah, can I just add into that as well? So totally agree. We acted as a gateway throughout the Kickstart scheme as well, and we had those similar conversations, setting expectations that they were still meant to turn up at work. However, one of the things that we did found it benefit was we did have some really supportive employers on, and there were some young people, one in particular that we dealt with, that was experiencing quite a lot of trauma. And it gave him, whilst being paid sick pay, it gave him a really good grounding for knowing that there are employers out there who will support them and will be understanding of the situation as well. And I think he gained from that, even though he was off quite a lot at the beginning, throughout that support, did gain confidence in employers to then remain in work after that as well. So I think whilst it was probably quite tough on the employers not wanting to pay sick pay for not being off, I think it did give young people an element of understanding as well from there. So I think there's kind of two sides to every story with that.
Yeah, and I suppose that's something that came up in our research in terms of, because employers, like you say, the flip side of it is because employers aren't paying the wages the government is, then that young person is probably given more time to deal with whatever they're dealing with, without that then being exacerbated by them losing their job because of that. And I think there are definitely examples where that kind of freedom that employers had to keep people on and it not affect their bottom line meant that that was to the benefit of a lot of young people. I'll just move this on to the next slide, which is basically about those ideas that I came to at the end of my presentation. And if you've got any reflections on these, it would be really useful as we finish the report and get it published, just to see what people think about those ideas. Again, if anyone wants to jump in, please just go ahead. really nice reflections coming in. That's useful to see that people think it's a good idea. Okay, well, I think today we might be finishing about half an hour early because this is kind of feels like the discussion's coming to an end, and this is the last slide that I have on Menti. So very happy to take any final comments on this, and please get your responses in on Menti. But if not, thanks a lot for coming. As always, if you have anything you want to share with me as the sort of youth employment policy person at ERSA, policy@ersa.org.uk is a great place to reach me. I'm happy to pick up any conversations, hear about your programs. If you've got something you'd like to present, either at this forum or through the Youth Employment newsletter, I'm always happy to hear about it. So please do drop me a line. If you're coming to the conference, I look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. If you're still thinking about it, I'm here, send me an email. We've still got a few tickets left. So yeah, thanks very much for coming and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Jack. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. See you later.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Jack, sorry, I wasn't able to put the report in the chat because of the sharing thing. I don't know whether you just want to email it around afterwards or whether I should quickly put it in there now. It might be easier to just email it around.
I'll be sending the email out tomorrow. Also, sorry that I didn't record. I forgot to record your presentation.
That's all right. I can send you the slides.
Yeah, brilliant. If you send me the slides and the link to report, then I'll put them in the sort of little catch-up email at the end. But thanks a lot, Hannah. We really appreciate it.
Okay, catch you later. Bye.
See you later. Bye.